A millionaire ripped the crutches from a blind girl, right in the middle of the street. But what a horse did next left everyone speechless. Watch until the end and find out why this moment shocked the world. Subscribe so you don't miss stories like this one. In the small town of Maplewood, nestled between rolling hills and verdant pastures of Virginia, life moved at its own unhurried pace. The townsfolk followed routines as predictable as the seasons, their days marked by familiar faces and unchanging landscapes. At the heart of this sleepy community stood Founders Square, a modest park where the morning light filtered through ancient oak trees, casting dappled shadows on worn benches and cracked pathways. It was here, beneath the largest oak, that 12-year-old Lily Morgan could be found each morning, her unseeing eyes turned toward the warmth of the sun. Lily had lost her sight at the age of 7 after an illness, but what most strangers noticed first wasn't her blindness, it was her constant companion, a chestnut-colored horse named Rusty. The gentle giant stood faithfully beside her, more than just a guide animal. He was her anchor to the world, her source of mobility and comfort. In a life defined by darkness, the locals had grown accustomed to the unlikely pair, their presence fading into the background of town life like the ticking of the courthouse clock. Few bothered to learn how Rusty had come into Lily's life, or how essential he had become to her daily existence. Even fewer noticed how the girl's delicate fingers would trace patterns in his mane when anxious, or how Rusty seemed to anticipate her needs before she voiced them. They were simply there, as permanent as the statue of the town founder at the square's center, neither bothering nor interesting most passers-by. Martha Morgan, Lily's mother, worked long shifts at the local diner to support them after her husband left, unable to cope with their daughter's condition. Martha had accepted Rusty into their lives after a local rancher offered the horse when his therapeutic riding program lost funding. What began as an arrangement of necessity soon blossomed into something profound, a connection that brought light back into Lily's world. On this particular Tuesday in May, Lily sat with her back against the oak tree, one hand resting on Rusty's neck as she practiced reading her Braille book with the other. The morning had started like any other, with Martha dropping her off at the square before heading to work. Lily would spend hours there, exploring the familiar territory with Rusty by her side before her mother would pick her up in the afternoon. A few regulars nodded in her direction, Mr. Patterson on his morning constitutional, Officer Dale making his rounds, but most hurried past, consumed by their own concerns. Rusty stood nearby, occasionally lowering his head to nuzzle Lily's shoulder or nibble at the sparse grass around them. His ears flicked back and forth, attentive to every sound, every movement, protective in his silent way. "Morning, Lily," called Mrs. Whitaker, the librarian who sometimes brought books from the children's section. "I've got something new for you next week. About horses, I think you'll like it." Lily smiled in the direction of the voice. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitaker. Rusty will enjoy that too." These small kindnesses were bright spots in Lily's routine, though they were rarer than they should have been. Most of Maplewood regarded her with a distant sympathy that never quite translated into meaningful interaction. It was as if her blindness had rendered her invisible, a paradox she found both painful and oddly fitting. The familiar rhythm of the morning was suddenly interrupted by the purr of an expensive engine, a sound out of place in Founders Square. A sleek black Range Rover pulled up to the curb, ignoring the no parking signs and blocking part of the pedestrian entrance. The car door opened with a soft thud, and out stepped a man whose presence seemed to command attention even before he spoke. His tailored suit, Italian leather shoes, and the impatient tap of his phone against his palm marked him as someone unaccustomed to the languor of small-town life. James Harrington had made his fortune in real estate development, transforming sleepy communities into profitable ventures with little regard for local sentiments. His reputation preceded him in business circles, where he was known for his ruthless, efficiency and uncanny ability to find undervalued properties. Maplewood, with its quaint charm and undeveloped potential, had caught his eye during a nationwide search for new investment opportunities. What the town saw as tradition, Harrington saw as stagnation. What they cherished as heritage, he recognized as marketable nostalgia. He moved across the square with purposeful strides, his eyes scanning the surroundings with the calculating gaze of someone already reimagining the space. His attention snagged briefly on Lily and Rusty, his expression darkening at what he perceived as an obstruction in his carefully visualized plans. Rusty sensed the newcomer's approach before Lily did, his muscles tensing beneath her touch. The horse shifted his weight slightly, moving imperceptibly closer to the girl. "Excuse me." Harrington's voice cut through the morning quiet, addressing no one in particular, yet somehow expecting immediate response. "Who's responsible for allowing livestock in a public park? This is a liability waiting to happen." A few passers-by slowed their pace, curiosity momentarily overriding their morning obligations. Officer Dale, who had been about to leave the square, turned back with a furrowed brow. "That's Lily's service animal, sir. They've got permission from the town council." Harrington's eyebrows rose. "Service animal? A horse?" His tone made the concept sound absurd, as if the officer had suggested the moon was made of cheese. "There are regulations about appropriate service animals. This is excessive and potentially dangerous." Lily's fingers tightened in Rusty's mane, a silent communication between them. She could hear the dismissal in the stranger's voice, could feel the sudden tension in the air around her. This wasn't the first time someone had questioned Rusty's presence, but something in this man's tone suggested he wouldn't be easily dissuaded. "Rusty helps me," Lily said, her voice softer than she intended. "He's my eyes." Harrington barely spared her a glance. "I'm sure there are more suitable alternatives that don't involve a 1,000-pound animal in a public space." He pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly. "I'll be speaking with the mayor about this. There are liability issues, zoning regulations." As he continued listing his objections, Rusty's ears flattened against his head, sensing Lily's growing distress. The morning sun caught the polished surface of Lily's crutches leaning against the tree beside her, auxiliary supports for when she needed to dismount or rest. Without warning, Harrington reached for them, intending to move them aside as he paced. "These are in the way," he muttered, more to himself than to Lily. "This whole setup is unworkable." The moment his hand closed around the crutches, something changed in the atmosphere of Founders Square. Rusty, who had been standing with remarkable stillness, suddenly moved with deliberate purpose. The horse stepped forward, positioning himself between Lily and Harrington with a grace that belied his size. He didn't rear or charge. He simply stood, immovable as a mountain, his eyes fixed on the man who held his young companion's crutches. The message couldn't have been clearer had he spoken it aloud. "You will not harm her." The standoff in Founders Square lasted only seconds, but to those witnessing it, time seemed to stretch and slow. Harrington stood frozen, Lily's crutches still clutched in his hand, his expression shifting from annoyance to disbelief as he stared at the chestnut horse blocking his path. Rusty hadn't made any aggressive moves, no pawing at the ground, no threatening sounds, yet the authority in his stance was unmistakable. His large brown eyes, intelligent and unwavering, remained fixed on Harrington with what could only be described as purposeful determination. A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the unusual tension disrupting their morning routines. Among them was Casey Fletcher, a local college student whose summer photography project had brought her to the square that morning. Without hesitation, she raised her smartphone and began recording, her artistic instincts recognizing a powerful moment unfolding. "Sir," Officer Dale stepped closer, his voice firmer now, "I'm going to have to ask you to return those crutches." "To the young lady?" Harrington blinked, as if suddenly remembering where he was and what he was doing. His grip on the crutches loosened slightly, but his expression hardened. "This entire situation is unacceptable," he said, his voice rising. "There are health codes, safety regulations." "James Harrington!" The sharp call came from Mayor Patricia. Wilson, who had been having coffee at the cafe across from the square when someone rushed in with news of the confrontation. She approached now with the practiced calm of a small-town politician accustomed to mediating disputes. "I thought I recognized that car. It's been a while since you visited Maplewood." Her tone was pleasant, but carried an undercurrent of steel. "Patty," Harrington acknowledged with a curt nod, still not relinquishing the crutches, "we need to talk about your town's liability issues. Having a child with a horse in a public park." "That child is Lily Morgan," Mayor Wilson interrupted, smoothly. "And Rusty is a registered therapy animal who helps her navigate our town. They have every right to be here." She held out her hand expectantly. "Now, those crutches belong to Lily." For a moment it seemed Harrington might refuse. His jaw tightened, his gaze darting between the mayor and the horse that continued to stand guard over Lily. Then, with obvious reluctance, he handed over the crutches. "This isn't over, Patty. I'll be filing a formal complaint with the county board. There are development opportunities being wasted here, and this kind of backwater sentimentality is exactly why Maplewood remains stuck in the past." He turned to leave, his dismissive gesture taking in Lily, Rusty, and the growing crowd of onlookers. As he stalked back toward his Range Rover, Casey Fletcher continued filming, capturing every moment of his retreat. By the time Mayor Wilson had returned the crutches to Lily and assured her that everything was fine, Casey was already editing the video on her phone. "I can't believe what Rusty did," Lily said, her voice trembling slightly as her fingers sought the reassuring warmth of her companion's neck. "He just knew." Mayor Wilson watched as the horse gently nudged the girl's shoulder, the animal's previous tension melting away now that the threat had departed. "Animals are more perceptive than we give them credit for," she said softly, "especially when it comes to protecting those they care about." What none of them realized, as the square gradually returned to its normal rhythm, was that Casey Fletcher had just posted her video to her modest social media following with a simple caption: "Businessman tries to bully blind girl, her horse." Has other ideas. Maplewood hero, cheek service animal. By noon, the video had been shared thousands of times. By dinner, it had crossed state lines and caught the attention of several animal rights groups and disability advocates. By the following morning, as Lily and Rusty made their way to their usual spot beneath the oak tree, the view count had surpassed 1 million, and the first news van was already parked at the edge of Founders Square. "Lily! Lily Morgan!" A reporter approached, microphone extended, cameraman in tow. "Can we ask you a few questions about what happened yesterday? About your horse?" Lily froze, overwhelmed by the unexpected attention. Rusty sensed her discomfort immediately, positioning himself between her and the approaching strangers. Before the reporter could come any closer, Martha Morgan appeared, having rushed from the diner when a customer showed her the viral video on their phone. "My daughter has nothing to say," she stated firmly, placing a protective arm around Lily's shoulders. "Please respect our privacy." But privacy had become a luxury they could no longer afford. The video had sparked something in viewers, a visceral reaction to the sight of a vulnerable child being defended by her loyal animal companion against a wealthy, powerful man. Comment sections overflowed with support for Lily and condemnation for Harrington. Memes featuring Rusty's steadfast stance spread across platforms, often accompanied by captions about loyalty and standing up to bullies. Hashtags like "Dash Be a Rusty" and "Stand Like Rusty" began trending. In his luxury hotel suite in the next county over, James Harrington watched the video for the 4th time, his expression unreadable. His assistant hovered nervously nearby, having just delivered the news that 3 potential investors had expressed concerns about partnering with someone facing such negative public attention. "It's a PR nightmare, sir," the assistant ventured, when Harrington remained silent. "Perhaps if you issued an apology." "Apologize?" Harrington scoffed, closing the laptop with more force than necessary. "For what? Pointing out legitimate safety concerns? That horse shouldn't be there," end of discussion. But even as he dismissed the suggestion, something in the video nagged at him, something about the horse itself. There was a familiarity he couldn't quite place, a sense of déjà vu he found unsettling. He pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on damage control. "Contact our legal team," he instructed. "I want to know exactly what laws are being broken by having that horse in a public park, and find out who that girl is, her full background. There has to be a more appropriate solution to her situation than turning the town square into a stable." As Harrington plotted his next move, the video continued its journey through the digital landscape, eventually reaching the desktop of Rachel Sullivan, an attorney specializing in disability rights cases. Her office in Richmond was modest compared to the gleaming law firms downtown, but her reputation was anything but small. She had built her career fighting for those whose voices were often ignored, and something about this case called to her on a level beyond professional interest. "Sarah," she called to her assistant, "book me a room in Maplewood for tomorrow night, and see if you can arrange a meeting with the Morgan family." Sarah appeared in the doorway, notepad in hand. "Is this about the horse video? It's all over the internet." Rachel nodded, replaying the footage once more. There was something compelling about the quiet dignity of both the girl and her horse, something that contrasted sharply with the entitled aggression of the man in the expensive suit. "There's more to this than a viral moment," she mused. "That man, Harrington, he's the developer who tried to bulldoze those historic buildings in Charleston last year. He backs down for nothing and no one." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Except apparently for a horse." Rachel smiled grimly. "For now. But men like Harrington don't stay back down for long. This girl and her horse are going to need someone in their corner when he decides to push back." Back in Founders Square, oblivious to the forces now gathering around them, Lily sat with her back against the familiar oak tree, Rusty standing guard beside her. Despite Martha's concerns, she had insisted on maintaining their routine. This place, this tree, this daily ritual, it was her piece of normality in a world that had suddenly become anything but normal. "Everyone's looking at us today," she whispered to Rusty, feeling the weight of unseen stares. "I can feel it." Rusty nickered softly, lowering his head to rest it gently against her shoulder, a reassurance, a promise. Whatever came next, they would face it together. As the afternoon sun filtered through the leaves above them, neither girl nor horse could know that their quiet stand in the square had set in motion events that would not only change their lives, but would uncover long-buried connections that tied them to James Harrington in ways none of them yet understood. The first threads of that revelation were already being pulled as Rachel Sullivan packed her briefcase in Richmond, as Mayor Wilson made calls to contacts in the county government, and as Casey Fletcher, scrolling through comments on her viral video, received a strange message. "That horse looks exactly like my grandmother's beloved Chesapeake. She was forced to sell him 5 years ago to a man named Harrington." Rachel Sullivan arrived in Maplewood just as the golden hour bathed the town in warm, honeyed light. After checking into the only bed and breakfast in town, a charming Victorian house run by a chatty widow named Elaine Porter, she decided to walk to Founders Square, drawn by a professional curiosity that had evolved into something more personal with each replay of the viral video. The square was quieter now, the day's visitors and news crews having mostly dispersed as evening approached. Rachel spotted them immediately, A slight figure in a blue dress, sitting beneath the oak tree, one hand resting on the neck of a chestnut horse whose coat glowed like burnished copper in the fading sunlight. She approached slowly, careful not to startle either of them. "Lily Morgan," she called softly when she was a few yards away. The girl turned her head toward the sound, her unseeing eyes somehow finding Rachel with uncanny accuracy. "Yes? Who's there?" "My name is Rachel Sullivan. I'm an attorney from Richmond." She stopped at a respectful distance. "I saw what happened yesterday, and I'd like to help if you'll let me." Rusty's ears pricked forward, assessing this new arrival with what seemed like thoughtful consideration. After a moment, he relaxed, which prompted Lily to do the same. "Help with what? The reporters. Mum says they'll go away soon once something else interesting happens." Rachel smiled at the girl's pragmatism. "They probably will. But what Mr. Harrington did wasn't right, and I'm concerned he might try to cause more trouble for you and Rusty." She gestured to the bench nearest the tree. "May I sit and talk with you for a bit? Is your mother nearby?" "She's picking me up soon," Lily said, her hand never leaving Rusty's neck. "You can sit if you want. Rusty doesn't mind." As Rachel settled on the bench, she noticed a subtle shift in the horse's position, a minute adjustment that kept him squarely between her and Lily, despite the girl's apparent ease. His protective instinct was so refined, so purposeful, that it strengthened Rachel's conviction that this case deserved her attention. "How long have you and Rusty been together?" she asked, opening her briefcase and taking out a small recorder. "Do you mind if I record our conversation? It helps me remember details." Lily nodded her permission. "Almost 3 years now. After the accident, when I lost my sight, I stopped wanting to leave the house. The therapists tried everything, but nothing worked until Mr. Abernathy from the riding school brought Rusty to meet me." Her face softened at the memory. "It was like he knew exactly what I needed. He let me touch his face, his mane. He stood so still, so patient. When Mr. Abernathy had to close the school, he arranged for Rusty to stay with us permanently." Rachel made notes as Lily spoke, particularly interested in the legal arrangement of Rusty's status. "And he's registered as your service animal? The proper paperwork has been filed?" "Yes, Dr. Bennett helped us with all that. She's my mobility specialist. She says Rusty is a unique adaptation solution for my specific mobility challenges. That's how she wrote it on the forms." The clinical language sounded odd coming from Lily's mouth, a reminder of the bureaucracy that governed even the most profound connections. "That's good," Rachel assured her. "That documentation will be important." As the conversation continued, Martha Morgan arrived, initially wary of the attorney, but gradually warming to her as Rachel explained her background in disability rights, law, and her sincere desire to protect Lily and Rusty from potential legal maneuvers by Harrington. "He's not going to stop," Rachel warned them. "Men like him see pushback as a challenge, not a deterrent. The viral video hurt his ego, and he'll want to reassert control." Martha's face tightened with worry. "We can't afford a legal battle. I'm barely keeping up with Lily's medical bills as it is. That's why I'm here," Rachel said. "I take your case pro bono. No cost to you, but to do that effectively, I need to know everything about Rusty's history, where he came from, who owned him before, anything that might become relevant." Martha hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Danny Abernathy would know more than we do. He's the one who brought Rusty to us after his therapeutic riding program lost its funding." As twilight deepened around them, they made plans to meet the following morning at the Morgans' modest home on the outskirts of town. Rachel watched as Martha helped Lily onto Rusty's back, the practiced ease of their movements speaking to years of mutual trust and adaptation. The image stayed with her as she walked back to the bed and breakfast, strengthening her resolve to protect this remarkable partnership. Early the next morning, Rachel found herself in the cluttered office of Danny Abernathy's now closed riding school. The man himself was a weathered 60-something with calloused hands and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "I remember exactly how I got Rusty," he said, rummaging through a filing cabinet. "It wasn't my usual way of acquiring horses for the program. Normally I'd rescue them from auctions or take donations from owners who couldn't care for them anymore. But Rusty was different." He pulled out a folder and laid it on his desk. "Here we go. Rusty, or Chesapeake as he was called then, came to me through a private sale about 4 years ago. The seller was in a hurry, paid me to take him actually, which never happens with a horse of his quality." Rachel leaned forward, interest piqued. "Who was the seller?" "A man named Edward Collins. Said he worked for some big shot who was liquidating assets after his mother passed. The mother had loved this horse, but the son wanted nothing to do with him. Collins handled the paperwork, seemed in an awful rush to get it done. He pushed a copy of the bill of sale across the desk. Here's the record." Rachel scanned the document, noting the signature at the bottom. "Edward Collins, on behalf of Harrington Estate." Her pulse quickened. "Harrington Estate, as in James Harrington." Danny shrugged. "I assume so. I remember thinking it was sad. This horse had clearly been well loved, well cared for. Top-notch bloodlines, too. Not the kind of animal you just discard." He scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Funny coincidence that Harrington's the one who caused that scene with Lily, isn't it?" "I don't believe in coincidences that convenient," Rachel murmured, taking photos of the document with her phone. "Mr. Abernathy, would you be willing to provide testimony about this if necessary? For Lily and Rusty? Absolutely. That horse saved that girl in ways medicine couldn't. Their connection is something special. Anyone with eyes can see it." Rachel's next stop was the county records office, where she spent hours combing through property transactions, birth certificates, and obituary archives. By mid-afternoon, she had pieced together a story that made her heart race with the kind of righteous indignation that had first drawn her to advocacy law. Elizabeth Harrington, James's mother, had died just over 4 years ago. According to her will, which Rachel had to sweet-talk a court clerk into letting her see, she had left specific provisions for her beloved horse, Chesapeake, to be cared for at the family's Virginia estate for the remainder of his life. The will explicitly stated that the horse was never to be sold or given away, as he had been her faithful companion for 15 years. James, as executor, had clearly violated those wishes, having Edward Collins quietly sell the horse to Danny, Abernathy's riding school, mere weeks after Elizabeth's funeral. Armed with this information, Rachel made one more stop before returning to meet with the Morgans. The Maplewood Historical Society was housed in a small building just off Main Street, where Henrietta Fleming had served as curator for over 30 years. The elderly woman's eyes lit up when Rachel inquired about the Harrington family. "Oh my, the Harringtons! They were one of the founding families of this county, you know. Elizabeth was the last one who cared about the family's roots here. Such a lovely woman. She used to ride her horse through town every Sunday, rain or shine." Henrietta pulled a photo album from a shelf. "Here, this was taken about 5 years ago during our centennial celebration." The photograph showed a regal-looking older woman astride a chestnut horse whose white star-shaped marking between the eyes was unmistakable. "That's Rusty," Rachel whispered, certainty settling in her chest like a stone. "That's Lily's horse." Henrietta nodded. "We called him Chesapeake back then. Elizabeth rescued him as a colt, raised him herself. They were inseparable." She turned the page to reveal more photos. Elizabeth and Chesapeake at various community events, the woman always smiling, the horse always attentive. When Elizabeth got sick, that horse would stand outside her window for hours. Some said he knew she was fading. The curator's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "After she died, James, that's her son, he couldn't get rid of the estate. Fast enough. Sold off most of the land to developers, auctioned the family heirlooms. Such a shame. Elizabeth would have been heartbroken." By the time Rachel arrived at the Morgan home that evening, Carrying a thick folder of documents and photographs, she felt the weight of responsibility pressing on her shoulders. The story she had uncovered was more than just a legal case. It was a narrative of betrayal, serendipity, and what some might call fate. As Martha ushered her into their modest living room, where Lily sat on the floor with her arms draped around Rusty's neck, Rachel chose her words carefully. "I found something important," she began, laying out the documents on the coffee table. "Something that connects Lily and Rusty to James Harrington in a way none of us could have imagined." Martha leaned forward, scanning the papers with growing astonishment. "Are you saying that Rusty once belonged to Harrington's mother, the same man who tried to take Lily's crutches?" Rachel nodded, watching as Lily's fingers tightened in Rusty's mane. Not only that, according to Elizabeth Harrington's will, James was never supposed to sell him. He directly violated his mother's final wishes. The implications hung in the air between them. The man who had tried to separate Lily from her beloved companion was the same man who had first separated Rusty from the person who loved him most. It was a circle of betrayal and redemption that no fiction writer could have crafted more perfectly. "What does this mean for us?" Martha asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Rachel's expression hardened with determination. "It means we have leverage. It means James Harrington picked the wrong girl and the wrong horse to bully." She reached out and squeezed Lily's shoulder gently. "It means we fight back." The Maplewood Gazette rarely published special editions, but the morning after Rachel Sullivan presented her findings to the Morgan family, Editor-in-Chief Mike Donovan made an exception. The headline ran above the fold in bold type, "Local hero horse once belonged to Harrington family." The subheading was equally direct, "Developer who confronted blind girl violated mother's will by selling beloved animal." By noon, the story had been picked up by regional news outlets. By evening, it had reached national networks, adding a dramatic new dimension to what had already been a compelling human interest story. In his hotel suite, James Harrington hurled the newspaper against the wall, his face flushed with fury and something else, a flicker of shame he quickly suppressed. "Find out who leaked my mother's will," he barked into his phone, "and get Collins on the line now." Edward Collins, Harrington's longtime personal assistant, had already seen the coverage and was preparing for the inevitable fallout. Their hasty disposal of Elizabeth Harrington's assets had skirted the edges of legality in several instances, but the horse, that had been a clear violation of explicit instructions. Collins had justified it at the time as a minor transgression, a detail that would likely never surface. Now, it threatened to unravel years of careful image management for Harrington developments. "I want this buried," Harrington continued when Collins called back. "Whatever it takes. Pay off the riding school owner, discredit the lawyer, find something on the Morgan family, anything we can use to make this go away." Collins's usual smooth confidence faltered. "Sir, I'm not sure that's the best approach given the public attention. Perhaps a more conciliatory strategy." "I didn't ask for your opinion," Harrington snapped. "Just fix it." But fixing it proved more challenging than either man anticipated. Rachel Sullivan had been methodical in building her case, gathering affidavits from Danny Abernathy, Henrietta Fleming, and others who could verify Rusty's provenance and Harrington's disregard for his mother's wishes. She had filed a preliminary injunction to prevent any attempt by Harrington to reclaim the horse or interfere with Lily's access to public spaces with her service animal. The court documents were public record, providing journalists with a trove of verifiable details that made the story impossible to suppress. Meanwhile, in Founders Square, something remarkable was happening. What had begun as curiosity about the viral video had evolved into a grassroots movement of support for Lily and Rusty. Local businesses displayed Team Rusty signs in their windows. Children brought carrots and apples to the oak tree where Lily and her horse spent their mornings. Mayor Wilson, recognizing both the human value and the publicity opportunity, announced plans for improved accessibility features throughout the town, starting with the square. Maplewood should be a place where everyone feels welcome and supported, she declared at a hastily organized press conference. What happened to Lily Morgan highlights areas where we've fallen short. We're going to do better. The mayor's initiative sparked a broader conversation about inclusion that rippled through community meetings, church gatherings, and school assemblies. People who had barely noticed Lily before now greeted her by name, asked how they could help, offered support in ways large and small. A local carpenter built a custom mounting block to help her get on and off Rusty more easily. The owner of the feed store provided premium hay and supplements at no charge. A group of high school students created a fundraising campaign to cover Lily's medical expenses, raising thousands of dollars in just a few days. Martha Morgan watched this outpouring with a mixture of gratitude and bewilderment. Where were all these people before? She asked Rachel one evening as they sat on the Morgan's small porch, watching Lily brush Rusty in the fading light. We've been here all along, struggling in plain sight, Rachel nodded, understanding the bittersweet nature of sudden visibility. Communities often need a catalyst to see what's right in front of them. Your daughter and her horse provided that spark. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. But catalysts create lasting change only if the energy is channeled properly. That's what we're doing now, making sure this moment becomes a movement. The following day brought another development. Edward Collins requested a private meeting with Rachel. They met at a cafe in the next town over, away from the watchful eyes of Maplewood residents and the increasing media presence. Collins looked haggard, the crisp efficiency that characterized his professional persona beginning to fray around the edges. "Mr. Harrington doesn't know I'm here," he began, nervously adjusting his tie. "If he found out, I'd lose my job immediately." Rachel waited, saying nothing, allowing his discomfort to build in the silence. "There's more," he finally continued, "about Elizabeth Harrington's will, things that haven't come to light yet." He slid a USB drive across the table. Copies of the original documents, including codicils that were overlooked in the final execution. There are provisions for charitable foundations that never received their bequests, family heirlooms that were sold rather than distributed as specified. The horse was just the beginning. Rachel didn't reach for the drive immediately. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Collins? Having a crisis of conscience?" His laugh was hollow. "Self-preservation. James is looking for someone to blame, and I'm the obvious target. I've worked for him for 15 years, done things I'm not proud of in the name of corporate expansion and profit margins. But this, watching him go after a blind child and her service animal, it crosses a line I can't ignore." Rachel studied him for a moment longer before taking the drive. "This doesn't absolve you of responsibility, you know." "I know," he acknowledged quietly. "But maybe it's a start." The information Collins provided proved invaluable, not just for Lily's case, but for a broader investigation into Harrington's business practices that had been quietly building momentum in the State Attorney General's office. What had begun as a spontaneous act of aggression in a small-town park was evolving into a reckoning that threatened the foundation of Harrington's empire. As pressure mounted from multiple directions, Harrington finally agreed to a meeting with Rachel, Martha, and Mayor Wilson. They gathered in the town hall conference room, the tension palpable as Harrington entered with his legal team, noticeably without Edward Collins. Rachel had advised Lily to stay home, concerned about the emotional impact of facing her aggressor, but the girl had insisted on coming, with Rusty waiting outside the building under Danny Abernathy's watchful eye. "Thank you for agreeing to this discussion," Mayor Wilson began diplomatically. "I believe we all want to resolve this situation in a way that serves the best interests of our community." Oi, Harrington's smile didn't reach his eyes. Let's be clear about one thing. I'm here because this manufactured controversy is affecting my business interests, not because I've done anything wrong. My concerns about safety and appropriate use of public spaces remain valid. Rachel leaned forward. Mr. Harrington, we have documented evidence that you violated the terms of your mother's will regarding her horse, the same horse that now serves as Lily Morgan's legally registered service animal. We also have evidence of other discrepancies in the handling of your mother's estate that could prompt a more extensive investigation. She tapped the folder in front of her. That's not manufactured. Those are facts. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Harrington's face. He glanced at his lawyers, who shifted uncomfortably in their seats. What exactly are you proposing? A settlement, Rachel replied. One that acknowledges the harm caused to Lily, ensures her continued right to use Rusty as her service animal without interference, and includes provisions for improved accessibility infrastructure in Maplewood. Martha added quietly, and a public apology for the distress caused to my daughter. Harrington's jaw tightened. Out of the question. I don't apologize for upholding legitimate concerns about public safety. Then perhaps, Rachel countered, you'd prefer to explain to a jury why you disregarded your mother's explicit wishes regarding Chesapeake, Rusty, or why several charitable foundations never received the bequests outlined in her will. I'm sure the media would find that testimony fascinating. The negotiation continued for hours, a tense back and forth of proposals and counter-proposals. Throughout it all, Lily sat silently at her mother's side, her expression composed despite the emotional undercurrents swirling around her. When they finally reached an agreement, one that met most of Rachel's demands, while allowing Harrington to avoid a public apology, Mayor Wilson suggested they move outside to formalize the understanding with a handshake for the press. As they filed out of the conference room, Lily spoke for the first time since the meeting began. Mr. Harrington, she called, her voice small but clear. May I ask you something? The businessman paused, visibly uncomfortable. Yes? Did your mother love Chesapeake, Rusty? The question hung in the air, disarmingly simple, yet laden with unspoken accusations. Harrington hesitated, something in his expression softening almost imperceptibly. Yes, he admitted finally. Very much. Lily nodded, her unseeing eyes somehow finding his face. I can tell. He remembers being loved like that. It shaped who he is. Before Harrington could respond, she turned and made her way toward the exit, her crutches tapping a steady rhythm on the marble floor. Outside, Rusty waited at the bottom of the town hall steps, his ears perking up at the sound of the doors opening. As Lily emerged, the horse nickered softly, a sound of recognition and welcome that carried across the crowd of reporters and onlookers. Without hesitation, Rusty moved to the base of the steps, positioning himself perfectly for Lily to descend, safely with the support of her crutches and his sturdy presence. It was a simple moment, an everyday interaction between girl and horse, yet in the context of all that had transpired, it carried the weight of triumph, not the noisy, chest-beating kind, but the quiet victory of enduring bonds over temporary power. From the top of the steps, James Harrington watched this reunion, his expression unreadable. For just a moment, in the proud arch of Rusty's neck and the gentle way he guided Lily's movements, Harrington caught a glimpse of his mother, her kindness, her patience, her unwavering loyalty to the things and people she loved. It was a quality he had never understood or valued, having built his life around acquisition rather than connection. Now, faced with the living legacy of what she had cherished, he felt the first stirrings of something long dormant, regret. As cameras flashed and reporters called questions, Harrington descended the steps to where Rachel and Mayor Wilson waited to finalize their agreement. The settlement would be signed, the immediate crisis resolved. But for everyone involved, the True resolution would unfold more slowly, in the gradual healing of wounds, both visible and hidden, in the reshaping of a community's awareness, and in the continued bond between a girl and the horse that had once belonged to the mother of the man who tried to separate them. A circle of connection none of them could have imagined before that fateful morning in Founders Square. 1 year after the confrontation in Founders Square, Maplewood had changed in ways both subtle and profound. The most visible transformation was the square itself, which now featured smooth, accessible pathways, tactile guidance, systems, and a small pavilion where Lily often gave informal demonstrations about service animals and disability awareness. Less visible but equally significant was the shift in the town's collective consciousness, a new attentiveness to inclusion that permeated local businesses, schools, and governance. On this particular autumn morning, as golden leaves drifted from the oak trees, Lily sat on a bench near the new pavilion, dressed in a blue sweater that matched the ribbons woven into Rusty's mane. Today marked the official opening of the Elizabeth Harrington Memorial Garden for Accessibility Education, a project that had grown out of the settlement and evolved into something far more meaningful than a legal obligation. "Nervous?" Martha asked, adjusting her daughter's collar. Lily smiled. "A little. Do you think people will come?" "Half the town is already here," Martha assured her, surveying the growing crowd. "And look who just arrived." Rachel Sullivan approached, elegant in a tailored suit despite having traveled from Richmond that morning. "The woman of the hour," she greeted Lily warmly. "Ready for your big speech?" "I've been practicing all week," Lily confirmed, her fingers finding Rusty's mane, a habit that had once been born of anxiety, but now seemed more like a shared language between them. "Do you think she would have liked it?" "Elizabeth Harrington?" Rachel considered the question thoughtfully. "From everything I've learned about her, I believe she would have loved it, especially the part about you and Rusty." In the months following the settlement, Rachel had continued to uncover details about Elizabeth Harrington's life, not for legal purposes, but out of a growing fascination with the woman whose final wishes had inadvertently created such a profound connection. Elizabeth had been a passionate advocate for therapeutic riding programs, having discovered their benefits during her own recovery from a riding accident in her 40s. She had quietly funded several initiatives throughout Virginia, including the very program where Danny Abernathy had first worked before starting his own school. The Memorial Garden, with its sensory plants, accessible design features, and educational plaques about service animals, seemed a fitting tribute to her legacy. One that James Harrington had initially resisted, but eventually embraced with unexpected enthusiasm. As if summoned by their thoughts, a sleek car pulled up to the edge of the square, and James Harrington emerged, looking less imposing than he had a year ago. The public scrutiny following the incident had forced significant changes in his business practices. The investigation sparked by Edward Collins's revelations had resulted in substantial financial penalties and a restructuring of Harrington Developments, now operating with greater transparency and community accountability. Surprisingly, once the initial storm had passed, Harrington had shown signs of genuine transformation. His contribution to the Memorial Garden had far exceeded the settlement requirements, and he had established a foundation in his mother's name to support service animal programs throughout the state. These actions, initially viewed with skepticism as mere image rehabilitation, had gradually revealed themselves as something more authentic, a reckoning with the values his mother had embodied but that he had long dismissed. Now he approached the pavilion with measured steps, nodding acknowledgments to townspeople who still regarded him with a mixture of wariness and grudging respect. He carried a small wooden box tucked under one arm. "Ms. Morgan," he greeted Lily formally. "You look very professional today." Lily turned toward his voice. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Harrington, and thank you for the garden. It's more than we expected." "It's what my mother would have wanted," he replied, the phrase no longer a perfunctory acknowledgement, but a guiding principle he was slowly relearning. "I brought something for you, for today's ceremony." He placed the wooden box in her hands. "These belong to my mother. I thought they should be here." Lily's fingers explored the intricate carving on the lid before carefully opening it. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay a set of silver and leather items that she identified by touch. A brush, a small curry comb, and what felt like a decorative bridal medallion. "They're beautiful," she murmured. "They were her grooming tools for Chesapeake, for Rusty," Harrington explained. "She used them every day, even when she became ill. The staff would bring him to a window where she could watch while they groomed him using these." He paused, something unsteady in his voice. "I thought perhaps you might like to use them sometimes." Martha watched this exchange with quiet amazement, still adjusting to the evolution of the man who had once been their adversary. Rachel stood nearby, her legal instincts momentarily overshadowed by the human drama unfolding before her. For his part, Rusty observed Harrington with the inscrutable gaze that horses reserve for humans. They are still deciding whether to trust. "I would be honored," Lily said finally, closing the box with care. "Perhaps you could show me how she used them sometime?" The invitation, so simple, so generous in its forgiveness, seemed to catch Harrington off guard. He cleared his throat. "I'd like that." As noon approached, Mayor Wilson called for everyone's attention and the dedication ceremony began. Community leaders spoke about the importance of accessibility and inclusion. Danny Abernathy shared stories about therapeutic riding. Rachel offered reflections on how a single moment of conflict had catalyzed a movement of positive change. When it was Lily's turn, she rose from the bench with Rusty at her side, her crutches now adorned with hand-carved wooden handles created by the local carpenter, another small transformation that symbolized how utility and beauty could coexist. "A year ago," she began, her voice clear and confident in a way that made Martha's heart swell with pride. "Most of you didn't know my name. I was just the blind girl with the horse. Rusty and I were visible but unseen, present in this square every day, but not really part of the community." She paused, her free hand finding Rusty's neck in that familiar gesture of connection. "What happened that morning wasn't just about Mr. Harrington taking my crutches or questioning Rusty's right to be here. It was about who gets to occupy public space, whose needs matter, and how we respond when those questions are challenged." The crowd listened in attentive silence as Lily continued, her words painting a vision of Maplewood, not as it had been, but as it was becoming. A place where difference was not merely tolerated, but valued, where accessibility was understood not as a concession, but as a right. "Elizabeth Harrington never knew me," she concluded, "but her love for Rusty created a bond that eventually brought us all here today. That's what this garden represents, not just ramps and tactile markers, but the connections between us that we don't always see until something forces us to look more closely." As applause rippled through the gathering, Mayor Wilson stepped forward to unveil the garden's centerpiece, a bronze sculpture depicting a girl and a horse, their forms artfully abstracted yet instantly recognizable to anyone familiar with Lily and Rusty. The plaque beneath it bore Elizabeth Harrington's name and a simple quote discovered in her journals: "True sight comes from the heart." The formal ceremony gave way to a community celebration that lasted well into the afternoon. Children took turns feeling the different textures in the sensory garden, guided by Lily's expert instructions. Elderly residents tested the accessible seating areas. Local businesses provided food and drinks, turning the dedication into an impromptu festival of small-town solidarity. Through it all, Rusty remained at Lily's side, his steady presence a reminder of how this unlikely partnership had become a catalyst for change that extended far beyond one girl and her horse. As the crowd began to thin in the late afternoon, Rachel found Martha sitting alone on a bench at the edge of the square, watching Lily demonstrate to a group of schoolchildren how Rusty responded to different touch commands. "You raised an extraordinary daughter," Rachel observed, settling beside her. Martha smiled. "I did my best, but Rusty deserves some of the credit. He gave her confidence when nothing else could." She glanced toward the far side of the square, where James Harrington stood in conversation with Danny Abernathy, their body language suggesting a dialogue that had evolved from antagonism to cautious respect. "I never thought I'd see that," she mused. Rachel followed her gaze. "People can surprise you. Sometimes it just takes the right circumstances to reveal who they really are, or who they could become. Like a town that suddenly sees a child who was invisible to them for years," Martha suggested. "Exactly like that." As twilight approached, casting long shadows across Founders Square, Lily and Rusty made their way back to Martha and Rachel. The day had been exhausting, but fulfilling. A milestone in a journey that had begun with a moment of conflict, but had grown into something far more profound. "Ready to head home?" Martha asked, gathering their belongings. Lily nodded, one hand on Rusty's neck, the other holding the wooden box Harrington had given her. "I was thinking," she said hesitantly, "maybe we could invite Mr. Harrington for tea sometime next week. He told me more about Elizabeth and Rusty. Stories I think Rusty would like to hear." Martha exchanged a glance with Rachel, both women recognizing the significance of this suggestion. "I think that's a wonderful idea," Martha said softly. As they prepared to leave, Casey Fletcher, the college student whose video had started it all, approached with her camera. Now a junior studying photojournalism, she had documented the entire year as part of her thesis project on community transformation. "One more for the collection?" she asked, gesturing toward Lily and Rusty, "for the before and after contrast." Lily smiled and positioned herself beside her faithful companion, their silhouettes outlined against the setting sun. In this moment, they were no longer symbols of vulnerability and protection, no longer viral sensations or catalysts for social change. They were simply themselves, a girl and her horse, connected by bonds of love and trust that had proven stronger than prejudice, stronger than legal battles, stronger even than the passage of time. Casey captured the image. Lily's hand resting on Rusty's neck, the horse's head lowered attentively toward her, both of them bathed in the golden light of a day that had begun as a commemoration, but had become something more. A celebration of how conflict can transform into connection, how seeing can transcend sight, and how the truest form of justice often comes not from courtrooms, but from communities willing to change. As they made their way home through the familiar streets of Maplewood, now navigable in ways they hadn't been before, Lily reflected on how a single moment of confrontation had rippled outward, touching lives far beyond her own. The businessman, who had once tried to take her crutches, was now funding accessibility programs across the state. The town that had overlooked her for years now celebrated her presence. The horse that had once belonged to a woman she never met had brought her not only mobility, but a place in a community that finally saw her clearly. Tomorrow, they would return to their spot beneath the oak tree in Founders Square. A routine, unchanged yet irrevocably transformed. Rusty would stand guard as he always had. Lily would feel the sun on her face, and the town would continue its daily rhythms around them. But now, those rhythms included them, acknowledged them, valued them, in ways that once seemed impossible. It was, Lily thought, as Rusty's steady gait carried her forward, the difference between occupying space and belonging to a place, between being visible and being truly seen. Dear listeners, we hope Lily and Rusty's journey has touched your heart. Their story reminds us that true sight comes not from our eyes, but from our capacity to recognize the dignity in every person and the unexpected connections that bind us together. For more emotional journeys like this one, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Just click on the link to your left. If Rusty's silent strength and Lily's courage moved you, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day, we bring you unique stories that explore life's complexity and the power of unexpected bonds. What moment in this story resonated most with you? Was it Rusty's protective stance, the revelation about his past, or perhaps the community's transformation? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until our next story, remember that sometimes the most profound changes begin with a single act of standing firm for what matters most.